Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf test is primarily discussing foods that you can use to set up an Eruv Tchumen or an Eruv Chatzeres. As we had seen before, the minimum size is usually enough food for 2 meals, but that can vary because if it's not actual bread, it could just be that it's the amount of food that you would eat together with bread, and that food combined with bread is enough for 2 meals. So this can vary. So we have 2 issues in every type of food, which we will discuss. First of all, are you allowed to use it as an Eruv or not? Is it considered to be real food to be used for an Eruv Chatzeres and for an Eruv Tchumen? And the second thing is, if it is usable, how much of it do you need? So the Gemara's first discussion is about apples. The Gemara says, and we start a few lines into the daf here, the Gemara says that Rava said one fine day he was feeling good. He was feeling like his head was especially clear, and he said, today I am like Ben Azai when he was sitting in the marketplace of Tveria, and he said that I can now answer everybody except for Rabbi Akiva. So he said, now I'm on that level, and you can ask me anything and I'll be able to answer. So one of the Chachamim asked, what's with apples? How much apple do you need to be able to make an Eruv Tchumen Eruv Chatzeres? So he said, who said you're allowed to use apples? So Gemara says, what do you mean who said? There's a Mishnah that seems to indicate that you could. The Mishnah is talking about other halachas, but it's again defining what's considered to be food. The Mishnah says, as far as if you eat something tamei, and you want to know, did that make you tamei, so that you can't eat truma now? So any type of food combines to the minimum amount, which is chatzi pras. Chatzi pras is about 2 kibetzim. And as far as the halacha of how much food you need for an Eruv, any food combines to the amount of 2 meals. And as far as the third halacha of Tumas Eichlin, where food can become a Tamei Tumas Eichlin and be Matami other food, that is 1 egg size. But all foods combine to this. So Moshe says, what's the kash from here? Your kash is because it says that all foods can be combined to an Eruv. Just because there's a rule, it says all foods, doesn't mean anything. We already saw on the daf, Chav Zayin, the Rabbi Yechanan says, just because somebody gives you a rule, don't assume that you can include everything in the rule. Even if he gives you exceptions besides the rule, it could still be other exceptions that he didn't mention. So Gemara says, no, that's not the kasha. The kasha is that it was put together with being Matami Tumas Eichlin. And apples are Matami Tumas Eichlin, and therefore, it's if they qualify for the Tumas Eichlin part of this list, they should also qualify to the halacha immediately before it, which is that they can be usable for an Eruv. So the Gemara says, okay, now how many apples? How much apple? The Gemara says, Rav Nachman says that it's a kav. You need a whole kav of apples. A kav is a pretty significant amount. It is close to, it's 4 lug, which is about 2 quarts. So the Gemara says, why do you need so much? I'll prove to you that you don't need that many, because we have a brayso that says as follows. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, as far as spices, you only need an uchla. Uchla is an eighth of a loig, an eighth of a liter. As far as other vegetables, you need a liter. Nuts, you need 10. Peaches, you need 5. Pomegranates, 2. Esrog, 1. This is the minimum size. And this halacha is not said about Eruvin. This halacha is said about how much you have to give for Meiser Ani, which is supposed to be given out to the poor, how much you have to give to each one if they come to collect. But about this, a chacham by the name of Gorsik Bar Duri said in the name of Rav Menashe Bar Siguvli, in the name of Rav, that the same halacha applies to Eruvin. So you see here what? You see that for an Eruv you only need 5 peaches. Now, peaches and apples are about the same size. So you should be able to suffice with 5 apples for an Eruv. Why do you have to have an entire kav of apples? The Gemara answers it's different. Even though they're about the same size, their quality is different, and therefore how they're used is different. Peaches are significant. They are important things, and they are eaten together with bread as part of a meal. Therefore, you only need the amount of peaches that you would eat together with the bread. You do not have to fill the entire volume of meal from the peaches themselves. Apples, however, are not, and therefore apples has to be the amount that you would actually make 2 meals out of, and therefore it has to be an entire kav of apples. Okay, that concludes that, but Rav Yosef takes offense with the fact that Rav Menashe Bar Shiguvli said that Rav said the same thing applies to an Erev on this brisa. Rav Yosef said no. Rav said the same thing applies to an Erev about a different thing, something similar Mishnah, which was also discussing Meiser Ani, but it wasn't about this. It was about that. And how could you say it was about this? And may Hashem forgive you for saying that this is the brisa that on which Rav said the same halacha applies to an Erev. So, which brisa did Rav Yosef think? Did he hold that Rav actually said about that the same applies it to an Erev? The following. It's a Mishnah. And this Mishnah says as follows: you're not allowed to give less to a poor man than, and here we have a number of different grains and foods and machlokes about several of them. So as far as wheat, it's half a kav. As far as barley, it's an entire kav according to Rabbi Meir, according to the Tanakama, and half a kav according to Rabbi Meir. Spelt is a kav and a half. Groigreis, which are dried figs that are not pressed together, is 1 kav. Pressed together in a cake of figs is a machlokes. Either it's 1 portion according to the Tanakama, or Rabbi Kiva, who says that it's half a portion. Wine, Tanakama says half a leg, and Rabbi Kiva says a quarter of a leg. And oil, Tanakama says a quarter of a leg, and Rabbi Kiva says an eighth of a leg. Now, as far as all other fruits, Abba Shaul says it's the amount that you could sell and use the money to buy the meal for the food for 2 meals. About this Mishnah, Rav came and said the same halachas apply to an Erev. That was Rav Yosef was upset about that, and the Gemara says, what's he so upset about? These two brises are, this Mishnah and this brisa are discussing totally different types of foods. They're not contradictory at all. Maybe Rav said it about both. What's the problem? Why is he so upset? The Gemara says, no, because there's a reason that we need to know that Rav agreed and said that this is the same halacha for an Erev about this Mishnah specifically. What is it? The Gemara has 2 attempts. The Gemara says, maybe it's because it says that there are spices here. The brisa which we quoted says spices, and what Rav wouldn't say that you can make an Erev on spices. Spices isn't food. So Gemara says that can't be the reason, because this Mishnah that Rav Yosef is saying Rav was referring to mentions grain, mentions wheat and barley. You can't eat wheat and barley. It's not food either. So if Rav doesn't have a problem with saying that could be used for an Erev, he wouldn't have a problem with saying that spices could be used for an Erev. Gemara says, no, there's a different thing, because the amount that's given here for wine is half a leg according to the Tanakama, and Rav elsewhere said specifically 2 reviusin, which is also half a leg. So Rav specifically agreed to this halacha that the shear of wine is half of a leg to reviusin, and we want it to match. So therefore we want it to be that it's clear that Rav said the same halacha applies to an Erev about this Mishnah and not about something else. Okay. Gemara says, fine, we'll accept that. We see it from there. Now, the Gemara says we had seen the halach is that the minimum size for an Erev is 2 meals worth. The question is it make a difference what those meals are made out of? Can it be a combination? So Rav Yosef says each food has to be a minimum of 1 meal. You cannot combine foods that each one is less than a meal's worth. You could just have 2 meals of 2 different foods, each one a meal size. That's what Rav Yosef held. The Gemara says that Rabbi said it's not true. No, you can have as many small amounts as you want, and it can all combine together to 2 meals. It doesn't matter how little you have of each of them. Now the Gemara goes back to the halacha of wine. So we had said that the halacha is that Rav says that you need half a leg, 2 reviusin of wine. So the Gemara says that can't be. The Brisa says, Shimon ben Elazar says that the only amount of wine you need is to be able to dip vegetables in vinegar. You need in order to dip meat in, olives and onions you need in order to be part of 2 meals. So you see that wine just needs to be enough to use to dip your vegetables. So why does Rav say that it has to be half a leg? First, there's 2 types of wine. That's talking about cooked wine, which is used as the dip. Rav is talking about drinking wine, where you need to be able to drink a significant amount that goes with the meal, and that's half of a leg. Okay, now we had mentioned vinegar here. So Gemara says, how much vinegar? You said enough to dip your vegetables, or possibly meat along with the vegetables. So the Gemara says, what type of vegetables? Enough how do you calculate the vegetables, the amount of vinegar that you need to dip how many vegetables? So according to Rav Gidol, in the name of Rav, it's vegetables that would be a part of 2 meals, including other things. That's how many vegetables you calculate, how much dip you need. According to the others, according to a different version, Rav Gidol Rav said it's the vegetables that you're actually planning to make 2 entire meals just out of these vegetables. That's how much you need in order to calculate the dip amount for them. Okay. Now, next thing we had seen just before was we mentioned olives and onions in order to go together with 2 meals. So the Gemara says, onions. Can you make a eruv out of onions? And Rabbi says, Shimon ben Elazar said that one time Rabbi Meir was spending Shabbos in Ardiska, and somebody came and he said, Rabbi, I made an eruv trumin with onions, and I came from Tivin to here, and I'm planning on, and I'm on my way to Tivin, and I came from my house to here, which is already further than the Tchum, and I'm on my way to Tivin. And Rabbi Meir was upset. He said, you just violated Hilchas Tchumen. That is not a good area of Tchumen. As a matter of fact, you're outside your Tchum right now, and you're not allowed to move more than 4 amos. You're stuck. Can't move out of your 4 amos. That's halacha. If somebody's outside, his Tchum is only allowed a space of 4 amos to move within. So you see that onions are not good for Tchumen. The Gemara says that's not a problem. Onions have 2 parts. There's the onion, the bulb, and there are the onion leaves that sticks out of the ground, part of the plant. The leaves are not edible. You can't make an eruv out of that. That's what that guy used. The bulbs, that is food. The Gemara says you see this in a brisa. It says that somebody who ate onions and he got up in the morning and he dropped dead. Don't be surprised. Onions are poisonous and they can kill you. But not all types of onions. The Gemara says there's a difference. Shmuel says it's only referring to the leaves, but if you ate the bulb of it, the onion, that's fine. There is no poison in the actual root of the onion. Also, the Gemara says it really depends on the size. When they've grown to be the size of a zeres, which is half an amma, it's the spread between the tip of the thumb to the tip of the pinky finger when they're spread as far apart as they go. So when the onion leaves are that big, they're safe. There is no longer any poison within them. Only when they're smaller than that, that's a problem. And Rav Papa says it's also only a problem if you didn't drink beer. But if you drink beer together with the onion leaves, it's also not a problem. Where it adds to this a brisa, a person should not eat onions because there is poison within it. And there's a story about Rabbi Chanina who ate half an onion with the poison within it, and he got sick and he was about to die. And the Talmid Chachamim were mispal for him because he was very important, the generation needed, and he lived and survived because of their tefillos. Gemara now moves on to discuss other foods and whether or not you can use them for eruv and what the amount needed would be. So the Gemara talks about beer. So Rabbi Zera says 2 halachas in the beer. First of all, you're allowed to use beer for an eruv, even though beer is primarily water. All it really is grain soaked in water. And it's also considered water as far as the halacha of a mikveh. The halacha is that a mikveh has to be water that wasn't drawn, wasn't handled in kalim. And if you have 3 loyin of drawn water that falls into a mikveh before it's filled up to the full 40 sa amount, the entire mikveh is possible. You have to drain the whole thing. So if 3 loyin of beer fall into your mikveh before it's filled up, it counts as if 3 loyin of water fell in. And as far as that halacha, it is considered water. However, it is considered food to the extent that it works for an eruv. So the Gemara first discusses mikveh. The Gemara says obviously it's considered water. All it is stained, soaked water. And we have a clear halacha that colored water counts as water to be a psul for a mikveh. So beer should for sure count as water to be a psul for a mikveh. What's the difference? They're both colored or flavored water. So says no, it's different. Colored water is still cold water. Beer is not cold water anymore. Nobody calls it colored water. We call it beer. And since it has a different name, you may think it goes by the name, and therefore it doesn't passel the mikveh, and we're therefore teaching you the halacha that it does passel the mikveh. But it also is usable for food, as an eruv. So the Gemara says how much? The Gemara says 2 loigin. It's 4 half legs. The Gemara says which is 2 loigin. That's 4 times as much as wine, which is half a leg. And the Gemara says that that's actually the source for this halacha, that beer should be 4 times as much as wine. And we see that because in a different halacha, there's a mission discussing how much you would need to carry to be in violation of the Issa D'Oraisa of carrying on Shabbos. And there we see that beer is 4 times as much as wine. So here also, as far as this halacha of setting up an eruv, we're going to assume that beer is 4 times as much as wine. What's that, Mishnah? The Mishnah lists various amounts for foods, how much is considered to be significant enough to be violating the Issur D'Oraisa of carrying if you carry it. And about wine, it says a quarter of a revius. Why? Because you're going to not drink wine straight, you're going to mix it with 3 parts water. And therefore, a quarter of a revius of wine will give you a full revius of mixed wine. That's why the share is a quarter of revius. But beer and other drinks is a revius. So you see, beer has to be 4 times as much. So we would assume here that for an Eruv, beer should also be 4 times as much. Therefore, it should be 2 full loigin, because the wine is half a loig. And the Gemara says this is not true. You cannot compare these halachas. Wine is used to go together with a food. It's very chashuv, it's significant, it's important, and it's used together with the rest of your meal. Therefore, it's a small amount. Beer is done differently. Beer is something that people sometimes drink as an entire meal. They have a beer for a meal. They have one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and that's the entire food for the day. So therefore, the amounts wouldn't be determined based on its relationship to wine. They have totally different formulas. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to learn it that way. It could be that is the shear to loigin, but it's not derived this way. Okay, next food on the list is the dates. So Rav Yosef says you are allowed to make an eruv with dates, and the shear is 1 kav. What's the source for that? So Rav Yosef says I can prove to you that a kav is for sure good enough. Could be less, but a kav is for sure good enough. Where do you see that? A brisa talking about somebody who accidentally ate some kayen's truma. Yisrael accidentally stole and ate a kain's truma. So the halacha is not only does he have to give back what he took because he took it, but it's a special mitzvah of returning truma. He has to give other fruits. He cannot use money. He has to give other fruits instead of what he took, and he's allowed to, and what he gives now becomes truma. The kedusha of truma goes on to it. So this brisa says that if he ate dried dates and he pays back with fresh dates, he gets a bracha. Tavio of bracha. He did a great job. So the Gemara says, okay, now let's analyze this. How many fresh dates did he give back instead of the dry dates? If it was a same monetary amount, he ate, let's say, a zuz of dry dates, and he gave back a zuz worth of fresh dates, so why does he get a bracha? It's the same value. So it must mean that he gave the same weight, the same size, and it turns out being worth more, because the fresh dates are worth more than the dry dates, and that's why he gets a bracha, because it ends up being more fruit. That will be a good explanation for why he gets a bracha, but what we see from there is that fresh dates are worth more than dry dates. We know that the shear of dry dates is a kav, so the shear of fresh dates is obviously at least a kav is for sure good enough. Maybe less than a kav is good, but a kav is for sure enough. If you give a kav, it's certainly enough. So Gemara says, not necessarily. We reject this. It could be that really the dates are not considered more valuable, and it's not that he gave the same size and it's more valuable. It's that he really gave the same value, and it could be that the same value could be, we don't know what the size is for that. If it's the same value, you asked why did he get a bracha for it, the reason is because people are more readily interested in buying fresh dates than they are in buying dry dates. And that's why it's easier to sell. That's why he gets a bracha for that. Okay, next food on the list is shasisa. Shasisa is made by roasted grain flour that's mixed with honey. So Rav Acha bar Pinchas says that the size for that is 2 spoonfuls. Kisani. Kisani is the next food on the list. Kisani is roasted grain. So Abaye says it's 2 buni, which is a size used in Pompadisa. A buni is about a fistful. Now, on the subject of Kisani, Abaye says my nursemaid, the woman who raised me, who he calls his mother, told me that it's good for your heart and that it takes away worry. And she also said, once we're on the subject, somebody who has a weak heart should do the following to strengthen his heart. He should get meat of the right leg of a ram, and then he should get manure of a cow which was excreted in the month of Nisan. If he can't get that, then he should get branches of an arava tree. Make a fire out of this manure and these branches. Use the coals to roast that meat and eat it. And that'll take away the problem of his weak heart. Okay. Now the Gemara goes to the subject of food which is meant to be eaten together with bread. So Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, anything which is meant to be eaten together with bread, when you calculate how much of that food you will use for an Eruv, it has to be the amount of food that goes together with bread. You don't have to make the entire meals. You don't have to have 2 entire meals worth of the food, 2 entire meals worth of the amount that goes together with bread in a meal. If, however, it's a type of food that you don't eat together with bread, or Yehuda Mishmuel spells out, then you have to calculate how much food of this you would need to make 2 entire meals just out of this food alone. And then he specifies, raw meat, he says, people eat alone, and therefore you have to have an entire meal just out of raw meat. Roasted meat, on that is Machlokes Rabbah and Rav Yosef. Rabbah says it's the amount that's eaten with bread, and Rav Yosef says no, raw meat, roasted meat is not eaten with bread necessarily. Roasted meat, you have to calculate the amount that you need to make 2 entire meals out of it alone. And then that, Rav Yosef says, how do I know? Because the Persians, they eat their pieces of raw meat called a tavaki, they eat it without bread. So Abaye says, just because the Persians do it, what does it have to do with anybody else? It should follow every person's individual minig. As a matter of fact, we see similar halacha. It follows what each individual is appropriate for him. As far as the halacha of the minimum size cloth to be significant enough to be makabel tumah. So for a poor person, it's a small piece, 3 fingers by 3 fingers. For a big person, for a rich person, it's a big piece, 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim. And the halacha changes depending on who we're referring to. So this halacha should also change depending on who we're referring to. Whatever's a normal meal for each individual. So Gemara says, well, maybe you're going to explain that no, this is a chumrah. The chumrah is that if somebody out there who eats it raw, just without bread, then you should have to have that amount, because there is somebody who eats it that way, and therefore you should need more to satisfy him. So the Gemara says that's not correct. You have a brisa that says clearly that the size for an Eruv depends on who's making the Eruv. If it's a sick person who eats less, then he eats less. If it's an old man who eats less, then he eats less. If it's a very hungry individual, then he eats more. So Gemara concludes it's a kasha. It's a good kasha on Rav Yosef. The Gemara doesn't give an answer.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.